Avery County is rich in its geology and in its history of mining. So come with us as we dig a little deeper into Avery County. Avery County has a rich and varied mining history, more so than most people realize. Even today, an amazing variety of minerals and gems can be found throughout the high country.
The Blue Ridge Mountains and this region and the southern Appalachians in general are very, very complicated. Some of the most complicated rocks that you will find anywhere. They've been metamorphosed multiple times, so signals of pressure and temperature, what you can record in minerals, they've been overprinted by a later metamorphism, and then a later metamorphism after that. So it's very difficult to parse out what actually happened here. And people can use their whole careers trying to figure out how these mountains got built in this region, and still they'll get kind of far, but they won't have the actual answer.
So I understand that our local mountains, which were once as big as the Himalayas, are the product of complicated geological processes that created all the different minerals that can be found here. But one question, why don't we have any coal like our immediate neighbors north in Virginia and Kentucky?
All right, so in the central Appalachians, West Virginia, eastern Kentucky, southwest Virginia, areas that are neighbors just to the north of us, they have been sustained by coal mining for quite some time. That's part of their history and their culture. We don't have that around here. Our rocks are way too old. So coal is formed from old coal swamps, which are these forests of great big huge ferns and trees that we don't really have anymore. They've since gone extinct. But because when plants evolved, this was during the Carboniferous time, and all of our rocks are before you even had shelled animals in the ocean. So we only had microbes in the ocean. There were no land plants on the rocks that make up the Blue Ridge Mountains in our region. So we can't have coal if we can't have plants on that land to then form coal.
When most people think of mining in the Appalachians, they automatically think of coal. But since we didn't have any local coal to mine, what other things did people mine for? Well, the list is pretty extensive. Iron ore, mica, quartz, soapstone, gold, silver, emeralds, and feldspar. Over time, however, easy access to these minerals disappeared, as miners had to go deeper and deeper to find them.
So while we do have a history of mining in this area, there is not really an economic incentive to do it today. The areas that are available for mining that have the minerals that we're interested in, these have been mined out historically. This happened years and years ago. So unless we have a severe economic need that would outweigh the cost, it's cheaper to get mineral resources from places that have larger deposits and where costs would be cheaper.
So, we still have deposits of many different minerals in these mountains, but with current technology and costs, it's not that efficient to go after them, and it hasn't been for many, many years. But the fact remains that at one time, mining was very important to the local economy. Who then were the first miners in the area? Without a doubt, it was the visiting Native Americans who mined local minerals and traded them far and wide, often for minerals and materials not found locally.
Now, the late Archaic period dates from about 5,000 years ago to about 3,000 years ago. And during that period, this is right before clay ceramic technology became prevalent in the region. Cooking vessels were made from soapstone. Well, soapstone geologically occurs in the Blue Ridge Belt from northern Georgia all the way up into New England. But there were soapstone quarries, prehistoric soapstone quarries, where there are historic soapstone quarries now, like around West Jefferson and Todd. But we find soapstone artifacts, vessels, primarily cooking vessels, made from these soapstones in the lower Mississippi Valley, in the Florida Panhandle, all the way out to the coastline of the Carolinas. So soapstone left this area and went very far, and presumably something came in exchange. And then later in what we call the Middle Woodland period, dating to around AD 200 to, say, AD 800, one really important resource of the mountains was mica. And mica from the Spruce Pine area and on down into Buncombe County, Yancey County, was traded out from this area, especially over into the Midwest in the Ohio area. And then in this region, we find little blades of this really beautiful chalcedony called Flint Ridge chalcedony that when you heat it turns purple and red and blue. And we find blades of that material on sites in the mountains here. And that material came from Ohio. So there was a big exchange network of lithic materials, mica and those bladelets. So vessels were exchanged, vessels with their contents, stone materials, possibly marriage partners, possibly all kinds of interesting things that aren't preserved in the ground.
Even though we know Native Americans had small surface mines scattered at rock outcroppings across the high country, finding evidence of their work is difficult. Why? Well, because as European settlers moved into the area, they took over and expanded the Native American mines, and in the process, obliterated most traces of those original mines. As those European settlers built their cabins and farms and wandered across the high country, hunting and exploring, they found a wide variety of minerals, often laying right on top of the ground. Some they were able to use on their farms, some they were able to trade, and some they had no idea what to do with. One of the most important minerals found in early Avery County was iron ore.
All right, well, there's mining really throughout the mountains. Fortunately, this area, it wasn't coal mining. It was in the Cranberry area, and then all into Carter County. The Iron Mountain is called Iron Mountain because there's a vein of magnetic iron ore that runs all along the mountain for miles. So a lot of this stuff was available on the surface. You didn't have to actually mine it. You more or less had to clear around and get it. And you could smelt it yourself, using fairly primitive techniques to get some metal. The main Cranberry iron ore mine was found in the early 1800s by the Perkins brothers. They were three brothers. Josh is one I know best. Shepard Duggar wrote a short story based on the finding of how the Cranberry iron ore was found. Supposedly the three brothers were at a party in Crab Orchard and probably were drinking a little, and they took the clothes off a guy and roughed him up a little, just in sort of a friendly, prankish way, and he got a warrant on them, and so they fled across the state line into North Carolina and were hunting, and specifically ginseng hunting. And in going along, Josh supposedly found some of these outcrops of the iron ore, and they took it to the Duggar Forge, which is over in East Tennessee, over near Butler, and said, what is this? Is this? Because you've seen from that piece of ore, you don't confuse it with just a regular piece of rock you find. And so they opened mine and started processing it. They built their own forge right in the Cranberry area, between Cranberry and Elk Park.
At the start of the Civil War, the Cranberry mine sat on what was the largest vein of known iron ore in the United States, and as such, it was considered very important to the South's war effort.
They mined iron ore for the Confederacy there during the Civil War. They would load it up in a wagon, and a slave would take that down the mountain, usually to the railhead just outside of Morganton. About 30, 40 men worked there during the war, and it was a good job. If you were working at the mines during the war, you were exempt from conscription and did not have to serve in the army. So you wanted the mining job to mine the iron ore.
During the Civil War, it was a major source of iron for the Confederacy. And Shepard Duggar talks in one of his books about the way, his family were Union supporters, and yet his father stayed out of trouble because he smelted iron for the Confederacy. Okay, I think Duggar says it was like sitting on a barbed wire fence and not getting split. He was helping the Union when he could, but smelting ore for the Confederacy, so they weren't going. The Home Guard wasn't going to bother him either.
Recognizing the importance of the Cranberry mine, the federal forces sent a raiding party to attack it in June of 1864.
We don't actually have a lot of details about what did happen to that during that raid. We believe that they just came in and they burned the shacks the miners were living in and the equipment, because it's not being, I mean, it's almost, it's not, it is surface mining. I mean, they've not really dug really deep yet. It's not like it is now where, you know, there are shafts over there that are hundreds of feet long. You know, that big catacomb of shafts over there now. A little more serious than surface mining, but I mean, it was not a major production. Largely because there's no way to get the stuff out. I mean, they load up a wagon and they take that wagon down the mountain, and that wagon comes back up and they load it again. You know, it's not it's not the operation that it would become later on.
As the Cranberry mine grew, the valley in which it was located also grew. New houses were built for the miners, along with a post office, a hotel, a school, and a store. Several new industries also sprang up to meet the needs of the growing mine. One of these was charcoal making.
Instead of bringing coal from West Virginia or Kentucky, they made their own charcoal. And again, that was a little cottage industry you had over in the Cranberry Elk Park area.
We got a mountain farm up there. It's up 4,800 feet elevation, right hanging right over the mine. And they cut all that big timber, virgin timber, down 5-foot lengths, and had leveled off spots on the rolling parts of the top of that mountain. And they stack it up on its end, about 6 rows. And then they use 6 or 8 inches of leaves, and then put about 4 inches of dirt on it, set it afire at the bottom and control the oxygen, and made it charcoal, and then wagon it off the mountain there to melt that ore till Twitchy was built.
So, I mean, they were getting the ore right there, they're getting the charcoal right there, and then one guy had made a living by making baskets to move the charcoal in. I think they were 6 feet long by 3 feet in a particular shape, so it's easily to dump out. Handles on either end.
Towards the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, the Cranberry mine went through a series of boom and bust periods, reflective of the national economy at the time. The arrival of Tweetsie Railroad in 1882 ushered in a period of growth, but ultimately, the mine became a victim of its own success and growth, and to the fact that newer, richer, and more easily accessible deposits of iron ore had been found in Minnesota.
As long as it was a cottage industry, really, it worked, and people made money all around with it. Once you began having to bring coal in, take the ore out, the energy required to produce the metal was prohibitive in terms of making it profitable enough to continue.
They had kind of stopped not long before World War II, and they investigated reopening the Cranberry iron mines, and they continue to investigate reopening the Cranberry iron mines, but they have never done that to any great length of time since the mid-20th century.
Although the Cranberry mine was a large and important mine in the early history of the county, it was not the only mine. In fact, there were dozens of smaller mines scattered throughout the hills and hollers of Avery County.
But I mean, there are mines all over this area that they got all kinds of things out of, like the mica, feldspar, all kinds of gems. There were, they called them groundhog mines. You know, you'd have just a hole on your property where you went in and mined whatever you could get there.
Aside from the Cranberry mine, one of the largest mining and processing operations ever to operate in Avery County was the Heel Mica Company, founded by David T. Vance, who would become known as the Mica King. The new company helped put Plumtree on the map.
The Mica Company, Heel Mica Company, got started back in 1891. My grandfather trying to find some way to devise some type of industry in the lower end of the county, in the Plumtree area. Of course, a lot of local mica mining was going on in that time period, and trying to find other uses for the mica. He contacted the company up in New York City, I think it was, possibility of using the ground mica, and he found out the information on how to set up the mill, So he set up a water grinding process to water grind the mica into a powder. And used an overshot water wheel, used the North Toe River as the source of water supply, and ground the mica into a powder form, which went at that time into wallpaper material. It gave the sheen or shine to wallpaper. Went into the early first manufacture of automobile tires. It's the white powder you used to see in tires to make them slip onto the rim a little bit easier, and so several other applications for ground mica. So that's where he got started in the grinding mica process.
By the 1920s, the Tar Heel Mica Company had become very successful, which did not go unrecognized. The Winston-Salem Journal trumpeted in 1923 that the company had become the second largest mica manufacturer in the world. Imagine that, the second largest mica manufacturer in the entire world, right here in downtown Plumtree, North Carolina.
That business did turn successful. He started finding a market for that material. And of course, to get it out of Plumtree is a pretty isolated area, pretty well off the beaten path. So he had to haul the mica by wagon, the processed mica, into Cranberry and load it on to the ET&W&C Railway, which took it into Johnson City and to distribute it out to other parts of the country.
Ever the astute businessman, Mr. Vance began to look for other ways his company could process and market the area's abundant mica supply.
He later found uses of the pure mica, which came out of the ground in sheet form or in block form, and then was split down into sheet form. Went into the windlass on stoves, wooden stoves, wood-fired stoves at that time.
As the American economy grew out of the Industrial Revolution, the need for mica grew as well. In 1881, Thomas Edison invented an electrical motor that used mica in its construction. Because it didn't conduct electricity, mica began to be used as an insulator in a wide variety of early electronics. And as such, demand for it soared. To meet incoming orders, Tar Heel Mica began to buy every piece and block of mica that it could find.
Yeah, there was a lot of mica being brought into the plant to be processed. In fact, he bought all the local mining areas mica at that time, the raw mica, and he hired quite a few people just to actually split the mica. Mica had to be split by hand. There was no other way to do that, and they used a very sharp knife type thing, and the mica in a block splits off layer by layer by layer, and some of it can be as thin as a hair, and that's how he got started in getting the mica splittings. So he did use a lot of local mica as long as it was being produced in quantity.
Many of the local Avery County folks who mined and sold mica developed legendary reputations over the years, with names like Fuddlin' Joe and Nub Goforth. These Wildcat miners were characters in the truest sense of the word.
A fellow by the name of Sam Brown from over here, he lived in the Crossnoy area, and but he mined several places in Plumtree, and he was quite a character and a half, I'll tell you. He had an old Jeep truck, I never will forget, and he would haul his, he'd put his dynamite, in the back of the truck there, and throw his caps right in on top of it. It didn't seem to matter. I remember a lot of times just seeing open cases, when he'd come to the store or something, that we'd, the old boys, how we are, just looking around, look in the back of that truck, and here'd be sticks of dynamite laying with the caps right beside of it. He was sort of a wildcatter and a half. He didn't take a lot of safety precautions, so to speak, with him. But he survived. He didn't get blown up by it. There was another gentleman, a Goforth gentleman out there. Nub Goforth. Nubbin was, I don't know how he got the name Nubbin. I never did figure out. I know that wasn't his first name, but we all called him Nub. He had an old, about a 48, 49 model Jeep. It was pretty well worn out, and I never will forget when we'd see him come in the evenings from where he was mining, come through Plumtree, and when he came out of the curve, the bridge right there in Plumtree that crosses the North Toe River, and he'd hit that bridge in a certain way, and that old Jeep front end was so worn out that the wheels would start wobbling, you know. At the time he got across that bridge, it was just jumping. He'd have to come to a complete stop, you know, to get it settled down and start back out. So we always watched for him to come through. I don't know why, as a part of our entertainment, I guess.
Over the years, many famous people came to visit the Tar Heel Mica Company, including Thomas Edison and Henry Ford. But times were not always easy for the company. During the 1930s Great Depression, the company and its workers suffered as orders began to dry up. But World War II changed it all. With mica being used in everything from radio tubes to gas mask eye holes, it was declared a critical resource by the federal government, who even set up a special business to buy all domestically mined mica.
Fortunately, the government had foreseen the possibility of mica getting very scarce, and they brought a lot of mica in and stockpiled it in warehouses in the New York area.
Because mica was so important to the war effort, David's father, who was now running Tar Heel Mica, was exempted from serving in the war so that he could keep production at the mica plant going full steam ahead.
My dad, fortunately, was of age pretty well at that time, you know, to be drafted in, and due to him working there, and the business was classified as a part of the national defense. He was given a 4F, I guess it was, you know, because he was part of the industry, you know, supplying mica to the military.
Because Tar Heel Mica was considered so important to the national war effort, special efforts were taken to make sure it was secure in case of German or Japanese invasion or infiltration.
Speaking of any guards or anything, we didn't have to have any guards or anything. But of course, during the first part of the war, they were still very scared, you know, of somehow infiltration, enemy, you know, coming into the country or whatever. So they built a little watchtower up on the hill behind the plant. And I remember as a boy, we used to love to go up and play in that thing. But it was built there as a sort of a watchtower, and people were supposed to man it so many hours a day. And I can remember the old charts in there. They had the designs of the Japanese and German airplanes, to how to recognize them and that type of thing.
While no German or Japanese forces were ever spotted or captured in Plumtree, business continued to grow for Tar Heel Mica. With the United States government as their biggest customer, they began expanding and hiring more workers. This amazing period of growth would continue well into the 1950s.
It started nonstop around 1946, really. And again, that seemed like the businesses started booming more so after the war ended. And it started running 3 shifts for 5 days a week. And I remember to highlight there in the early 50s, the plant worked approximately 250 people. So that was a lot of people had a lot of work throughout that valley. I remember one time there, we had something like over 400 different types of dyes to cut the different types of products, because we were making so many different parts for different companies all over the United States.
For over 100 years, the Tar Heel Mica Company operated in Plumtree. As the end of the century approached, however, business began to decline as competition and foreign supplies of cheap mica began to eat into their market share. Conditions were worsened in the early 2000s when energy costs started to skyrocket. Finally, the decision was made to close one of Avery County's longest-running businesses.
So it was a hard decision to see it close, but we finally made that decision and shut the doors on it. And it operated right up to that last day. The people came in that morning. They clocked in and worked their daily 8 hours. And when they clocked out that evening, it was pretty well it. And everything was left just as it was.